17 million people were watching, and in one sentence, everything changed. Denzel Washington stood up to Vice President Donald Trump over a plan that could devastate Medicaid. He expected debate, perhaps even pushback, but not the ridicule, mockery, and humiliation that followed on live television. 2 days later, Denzel filed a $100 million lawsuit that shook the White House, the courts, and the conscience of the nation. That single confrontation revealed the clash between power and principle, truth and theatrics. The hearing room felt like a courtroom before a verdict. Marble columns towered overhead, and the congressional seal gleamed above the dais. Cameras were fixed, ready to capture history. Denzel sat poised, calm yet focused. In front of him lay a thick folder stamped, "Emergency Medicaid Impact." No theatrics, no cheap lines, only facts. "This budget will strip healthcare from over 12 million low-income children," he said. "You won't see them on charts. You'll see them in emergency rooms, sick, abandoned, and left behind." He lifted a CDC chart showing spikes in red, each bar a silent alarm. "This isn't about numbers. It's about lives." The murmurs of staffers rippled through the room, startled by the intensity. Denzel's gaze never wavered. Then Trump spoke. Confident, cold, mechanical. "The budget is not the place for sad stories. We're here to fix the system," he said, smirking. "And frankly, Mr. Washington, this government is not your therapy couch." A few aides chuckled. Denzel remained steady, jaw set like steel. "These cuts aren't just numbers," Denzel said. "They are human lives. They're children, mothers, and families. Ignoring them isn't policy, it's cruelty." Trump leaned forward, sneering. "Support programs are a financial clown show, an emotional stunt." Gasps filled the room. One senator whispered, "Did he just say that?" Reporters typed furiously. The vice president had called children's healthcare a circus, and framed Denzel as the ringmaster. Outside, social media erupted. Clips resurfaced of Trump mocking struggling families, now paired with today's footage. America watched, shocked. Inside, Denzel Washington didn't flinch. But the system trembled. He turned the page to a report from the Urban Institute. Thick, highlighted pages. "If this budget passes, over 12 million children will lose health care. This is not opinion, it's verified, peer-reviewed data. Real lives, real harm." He held the report steady, letting the gravity sink in. Senators shifted uncomfortably, and a few aides pretended to wipe tears. "You can ignore me," he said calmly, "but you cannot ignore these numbers." Trump's response was cruel, precise. "If their parents had real jobs, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess," he said, smirking. "This government isn't here to coddle anyone." The words hit like a blow, aimed at the most vulnerable. Denzel remained unshaken, holding the facts like a shield. The tension was almost unbearable. A congresswoman stood, a hand raised, but Trump dismissed her coldly. "She's not testifying. She's performing." Then came the most cutting remark. "You are not Martin Luther King," Trump said. "You are the Instagram version of a dream that's been dead for a long time." The chamber fell silent. Witnesses froze, staffers stiffened, and the cameras stayed locked on Denzel's face. But Denzel did not react with anger. He did not shout. He did not retreat. His silence carried the weight of truth and defiance. Slowly, the atmosphere shifted. Lawmakers who had agreed with Trump began to feel the weight of shame. Outside, across America, viewers realized this was more than a confrontation. It was a moment of reckoning. Denzel's posture, his calm determination, and his reliance on facts over theatrics reminded everyone of what true courage looks like. It wasn't about raising voices or performing for cameras. It was about standing for what's right, for those who have no voice. The room may have been tense, but the story was clear. Policy is not just numbers on paper. It is the lives of real children, families, and communities. And when one man stands for truth, even against overwhelming power, the nation watches, and something shifts. 17 million Americans saw it all unfold in real time. And for one shining moment, facts, courage, and integrity triumphed over mockery and cruelty. The nation had watched a moment when civility fell away, and cruelty stood exposed. Still, Denzel Washington remained composed. He didn't shout, storm out, or respond with anger. Instead, he let silence speak, and it roared. Exactly 48 hours later, that silence transformed into action. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a statement. It was a legal filing that would shake American politics to its core. At 9:04 a.m., in the U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C., Denzel's legal team entered carrying a binder titled The Weight of Reckoning, filed under Washington v. Trump. 74 pages of unflinching, precise legal argument. The lawsuit accused Vice President Donald J. Trump of public defamation with clear racial and political hostility, delivered live on national television under the authority of his office. This wasn't theatrics, it was a methodical account of humiliation. It argued that Trump's words were not policy debate or protected speech, they were calculated attacks intended to harm. At the center was one number: $100 million. $25 million for personal damages, career impact, and public targeting, and $75 million in punitive damages, not just to punish, but to send a warning through the halls of power. No one is above accountability. Denzel's team didn't just draft a lawsuit, they crafted a manifesto. Intentional racial degradation has no place, even in the highest offices. Within the hour, the courthouse steps became a storm of flashing cameras, jostling reporters, and live broadcasts. This was unprecedented. No sitting vice president had ever faced a personal lawsuit for actions taken during a congressional hearing. The legal filings were airtight. Precedents like Grawl v. United States and Hutchinson v. Proxim were cited to show that public figures cannot hide behind the First Amendment to commit defamation. The message was clear: using congressional hearings to stage racially charged attacks is outside the constitutional role and immunity of office. Trump had laughed during the hearing. He mocked Denzel's presence and dignity. But now, the law was in motion. The lawsuit was not resistance, it was reckoning. The media exploded. Clips of Trump's mockery circulated alongside today's filings. The narrative had shifted. Cameras were no longer following Trump like a leader, they were chasing him like prey. He stepped behind a podium outside the West Wing, flanked by flags, his composure now cold calculation. Politics is not a space for wounded feelings, he said, rehearsed and precise. We cannot allow public discourse to become therapy for the emotionally fragile. This isn't bullying, it's governing. But the public had already seen something sharper than words. Multi-angle clips from the hearing showed him red-faced, finger-pointing, jaw-tight, voice cracking in rage. Split-screen edits juxtaposed his words with his actions, revealing the contrast: calm rhetoric over visible fury. Headlines exploded: "Calm men don't point like this," the vice president unmasked. Denzel did not respond immediately. He didn't need to. The nation had already witnessed the attack. The silence of restraint became a weapon of its own. Congress began to stir. Progressive leaders moved swiftly. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, and Ilhan Omar delivered scathing letters demanding accountability. They called Trump's conduct a deliberate assault on a sitting member of Congress and the communities he represented. Within hours, 42 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Progressive Caucus, and key voices in the Women's Caucus released a formal resolution condemning Trump's behavior. The message was clear: cruelty cannot be normalized, even at the highest levels of power. Cable anchors and political commentators debated openly. Can a vice president be censured for verbal misconduct? The conversation shifted from partisanship to morality. This wasn't about Denzel's restraint anymore. It was about whether the system itself had a conscience. The federal courthouse in downtown D.C. became a monument to accountability. Satellite trucks lined Constitution Avenue, journalists and citizens gathered, signs raised, emotions raw. Inside, the courtroom was tense, every seat filled. 11 million Americans watched the live feed. Donald J. Trump entered, flanked by top-tier attorneys. Tailored suit, calculated posture, but eyes colder than ever. He took his seat like the room owed him allegiance. Every gesture measured, fingers interlocked, knuckles white. Then Denzel Washington entered. No entourage, no spectacle, just presence. A fitted black blazer like armor, gold-rimmed glasses catching the light, and a red folder filled with 200 pages of meticulously organized evidence: testimony, memos, transcripts, expert declarations, and media analysis. Every step echoed with purpose. He didn't look at Trump. His eyes were forward, focused not on revenge but on record. He placed the folder on the table calmly. This wasn't vindication, it was delivery. The judge, known for precise rulings and zero tolerance for theatrics, entered. Scanning the room, he paused on Denzel, then Trump. Without striking the gavel, he declared, "This case is not about ideology. It is about the ethical limits of power when spoken aloud." Denzel's lead attorney rose, composed and sharp. "Your Honor, with permission, we request to enter audio evidence captured from a concealed microphone worn by Mr. Washington during his televised exchange with the defendant." The courtroom leaned in collectively. Trump's team stiffened. The judge nodded. The room was ready. The audio would expose what the nation had seen, not opinion, but deliberate cruelty broadcast to millions. And there, in the heart of the federal courthouse, the legal reckoning began. The words were no longer just an insult. They were a challenge to power, a test of accountability, and a declaration that truth, when wielded with courage, cannot be silenced. The courtroom was silent, heavy with tension. Denzel Washington had just revealed the truth, and it hit harder than any argument could. 10 seconds. That was all it took for the world to see the strategy behind the cruelty. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't heat-of-the-moment anger. It was deliberate. The plan: exploit a black man's dignity, trigger a reaction, and make the response the story. A juror, a black woman in her 50s, sat motionless, hands clenched, eyes moist. A young intern stared blankly at his notebook. And Trump's posture faltered. A slight hunch, pale face, not shame, but exposure. His words, now on tape, were a record. His lead attorney spoke quickly, trying to frame it as politics, a misread strategy, not personal defamation. But the silence in the room was louder than any rebuttal. It condemned the act. Denzel's counsel rose calmly. No theatrics, no show. He walked to the terminal, pressed a key, and the courtroom shifted. An email appeared on the screen. Subject: push buttons hard, make him snap. Date: 3 days before the hearing. Sent by a senior staffer, reviewed and approved. The phrase hung in the air. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. A premeditated emotional trap designed to discredit a black congressman. The jury didn't gasp. They sank into the weight of it. Even Trump's attorneys had no words. The truth was visible, documented, undeniable. Denzel, calm and poised, didn't need to look at the screen. He had lived the sentence, endured the trap, and never wavered. Now, the world could see how he refused to break. Cross-examination began. Denzel's lead attorney stepped forward with a single folded page, nothing more. The courtroom held its breath. Trump, now under oath, adjusted his collar, fingers twitching. The attorney's voice cut through. "Mr. Trump, did you ever state in any meeting or communication that this is an opportunity to discredit people like him?" The question was simple, precise, and damning. Trump hesitated, fingers tapping nervously. He looked down, then up, and muttered, "I don't recall specifically." That answer wasn't denial, it was an admission. A juror with silver braids crossed her arms, jaw tight. Millions across the country watched, recognizing the pattern. It wasn't a slip, it was proof. Then Denzel stood. No gesture, no waiting for permission. One step forward, his black suit sharp, every movement deliberate. His eyes locked on Trump, voice calm, steady, and full of authority. "The issue isn't that you forgot, Mr. Trump. It's that you've done this so often, you don't notice anymore." Each word landed like steel. Cameras clicked. The room held its breath. Trump didn't flinch outwardly, but his body betrayed him, shoulders stiff, eye flickering. Denzel wasn't accusing him of a single moment. He was challenging the system that allowed cruelty to hide behind strategy. Every condescension, every manipulation, every smear disguised as policy, he called it out. For 4 days, the world waited. Networks replayed clips, lawyers debated strategy, scholars analyzed precedent. The email, the tape, the calm defiance in Denzel's eyes, all burned into public memory. Finally, the judge returned with the jury's verdict. Silence filled the room as he read the words. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant, Vice President Donald J. Trump, engaged in systemic defamation and abused his office to publicly humiliate his political opponent with calculated intent. Damages awarded, $100 million. Gasps rippled. A journalist whispered, 100 million. Trump sat frozen, still a stone, his attorney leaning in with no response forthcoming. He was not defending. He was witnessing something greater than himself. The cameras turned to Denzel. He sat still, absorbing the moment. His gold-rimmed glasses reflected the courtroom lights, his calm radiating authority. Slowly, he closed his eyes, then opened them. "This is for my mother," he said softly. No explanation needed. The room, the country, understood. This wasn't about money or revenge. It was about dignity. For every person silenced, baited, or belittled for showing emotion. Hours later, outside the courthouse, Denzel stepped forward to speak to the press. No entourage, no spectacle, just clarity and purpose. "I didn't sue because I am weak. I sued to remind this country that even in politics, every person deserves to be treated with dignity." He held up a thick, unbranded folder. "This," he said, "is the founding document of a new political fund, Power Without Permission. It's for black and brown leaders told to wait, lower their voices, or swallow their anger. This isn't charity, it's structure, armor, and a blueprint for the future. Your passion is proof you are alive in a system that expects your silence." No applause, no fanfare, only understanding. Reporters whispered, young journalists looked in awe, and America leaned in. Denzel didn't wait for questions. He walked back inside, leaving the message clear. He had delivered justice, purpose, and power, not just for himself, but for everyone watching. Power Without Permission was no longer just a fund. It was a signal, a warning, a blueprint, a promise. And it was the one thing Donald J. Trump could never outvote. But silence in Washington never lasts long. Less than 3 days after the verdict, as media coverage peaked, something changed inside the halls of power. In a marble-paneled chamber on Capitol Hill, the Senate Subcommittee on Governmental Ethics convened an emergency session. The target, Vice President Donald Trump. This was not revenge. It was accountability. The committee examined internal documents, emails, and audio recordings, the same evidence that had shaken the courtroom. Now, the stakes were constitutional. Trump had oversight over federal communications, a role that shaped the narratives Americans see. But now that power looked compromised. One senator whispered, "He wasn't overseeing communication. He was orchestrating humiliation." Then came the vote. Immediate, decisive, surgical. Donald J. Trump was stripped of all authority over federal media oversight. The vote, 113 in favor. Even some members of his own party stepped back. Trump did not appear. His office released a cold, 14-word statement. No apology. No explanation. Just the quiet unraveling of influence. The deeper impact came from education. At Columbia Law School, a new course quietly appeared, Ethics and Power in the 21st Century. At its core, Washington's trial transcripts, FCC documents, social media analysis, and studies on how power disguises cruelty as policy. Each class opened with clips of Trump's smirk and ended with Denzel's whispered words from the courtroom, "This is for my mother." The dean's statement became the most quoted, "History isn't just debate. It's the choice to honor dignity when it's dishonored." Back in Washington, the tone shifted. Press releases were rewritten. Politicians deleted old posts. Even former allies began to distance themselves. Trump had become a case study, not in ideology, but in abusing power. Denzel Washington hadn't just won a lawsuit. He had drawn a national line between disagreement and degradation, between freedom of speech and the license to dehumanize. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about memory, dignity, and refusal. His 7 words, "This is for my mother," whispered, not shouted, carried farther than every insult hurled at him. Trump never understood what Denzel always knew. Silence, when chosen, is the loudest weapon. He didn't sue because he was hurt. He sued because silence had too often been mistaken for submission. He sued to show that when power is used to humiliate, it will face accountability. This case became more than a precedent. It became a curriculum. Not for drama, but to ask a question America must face. Where does disagreement end and degradation begin? Power without restraint is not leadership, it is cowardice in a suit. Denzel Washington, armed only with transcripts and truth, forced that cowardice to blink. He didn't yell. He didn't gloat. He stood as every black man, every black woman has had to in every meeting, every classroom, every moment their value was questioned before their voice was even heard. He didn't just win a case. He rewrote the rules. Because some battles aren't fought with fists. They're won by refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to be erased. This is for my mother. Not a slogan. Not wealth. Not power. A voice passed down like armor, finally spoken aloud for the world to hear. Future generations won't remember this moment as Trump's fall, they will remember Washington's rise. Not in volume, but in unshakable truth. Justice, accountability, dignity, they are not optional. Power does not belong to those who shout the loudest. It belongs to those who refuse to be silenced. Every room, every table, every moment where someone's dignity is left to die in silence, this story reminds us, not this time, not again.